So it's good for you because it's protective, but it's also really good for whomever you're speaking to. And when it comes to advocacy and leadership, you will be most effective when you demonstrate to others that they are important. When you demonstrate they're important, that their perspective is important, and that they're heard. And that's really the heart of servant leadership. And I was glad somebody put that in the chat earlier. When we listen more than we talk, and we emphasize that what we're doing is in the service of other people, that's really the heart of servant leadership. These skills also help us evaluate whether what we're doing is advocacy, or if we've fallen into the trap of trying to speak for someone else when it's maybe not our place to do that. Again, if we can take that time to examine our bias, and instead of trying to speak for people, we do it from that perspective of empowering them to advocate for themselves, perhaps, if they're able to. And if not, that we somehow include their voice in the decisions that we make on behalf of them. You know, it's very complicated and depends on the individual circumstances, but I do think it's important if we can recognize that we're not speaking for other people, but we're speaking for, like, to support them. That's hard to communicate over Zoom, by the way. But hopefully you're with me. Okay, so the second tool is embodying your values. And I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so I can see more of your face, more faces. That's nice. Okay, so Simon Sinek, I don't know if any of you have heard of Simon Sinek. He's kind of a leadership guru. He gave a very memorable TED Talk on starting with why. And I'd recommend it. But he says, he has a quote that he says, "Our passion lies deep in who we are, not what we do." So embodying our values starts with identifying what they are. What is most important to you? How do those things rank, especially when you have a decision to make? Embodying our values requires courage. I was so glad Alicia Clare talked about that yesterday. I was tracking right with her in her keynote. We tend to think of courage as an innate quality, though. We either have it or we don't. Like, that's how we think about it. But actually, courage is a skill. We can learn, we can develop it more fully. It takes dedication, of course. It requires us to evaluate, like, the level of risk in a situation, for instance. And then it requires us to sit with discomfort for longer periods of time. We can actually cultivate the capacity to do that, though, again, through, like, mindfulness, through some of those practices that help us listen and not jump in to try to fix. I recently listened to an interview with Ash Beckham, who's a really powerful speaker on LGBTQ advocacy, as well as what she calls everyday leadership. And she also has a TED Talk. Can you tell I'm a big fan of TED Talks? Love TED Talks. But she has a TED Talk. And in that talk, she talks about how we all have closets, those parts of ourselves that we hide. We hide them from other people, usually because we've experienced some kind of shame around it in some way. And so she encourages everybody to come out of whatever closet they're in. That, you know, when we can really, and it takes courage, definitely takes a lot of courage to come out of those different closets. Because when we're in those closets, we feel safer. We feel like we're somehow more protected. But what she says is that we truly only become whole and effective when we stop hiding from ourselves and from others. When we embody our values, when we live as authentically as possible. And this is important as advocates and leaders because living our truth makes us believable. It instills trust from other people. It builds a sense of safety for those that we interact with. Great leaders are great, not because they have great power, but because people trust and respect them. And actually, I have that on a slide, so I should show it to you. But because people trust and respect them, that's where the power comes from. Trust and respect. So this tool of embodying our values also requires humility, recognizing that not everyone sees the world in the way that I do. Not everyone values the same things I do. And so we get curious. We take kind of an outward focused mindset. And we could define that outward focused mindset as looking at how my behavior impacts others and being accountable then for doing whatever it is I do in a way that doesn't make it more difficult for somebody else to do their job, their role, their life. And it's being able to change your mind. And I'm so glad somebody put that on the chat too. Being able to change your mind or allow your mind to be changed without compromising the values that you have at your heart. And that's really integrity. We keep those values, but we can change our mind. And sometimes that's a kind of a dance that happens, I think. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second because I want to talk about this really interesting thing that I read also. I like to read a lot. One of my strengths is input on StrengthsFinder. I love to just soak in information and then share it with people. So here we are. But I was reading some work from Jim Kouzes, who's a leadership expert, and he compares development of a leader to the development of an artist. And I thought you all would find this really fascinating. So he talks mostly about visual arts in what he's doing, but I think we can easily relate a lot of what he says to musicians. And so he talks about how there are 3 stages or phases in the development of an artist. First, they tend to be focused outside, landscapes, still lifes, that sort of thing. I think in music, we can make the parallel that we first are focused a lot on technique, right? We learn the notes, we learn the fingerings, all of that kind of stuff. Learn how to read the notes on the page. Then the second phase turns inward. So for artists, they start to paint their emotions or their internal experience. For musicians, I think that's where we start to actually find out how we can express emotion through the music that we create. And the meaning of the music too. And we draw that out from inside of us. And then the third phase is an integration. So both finding our voice and the expressive act of creating the art or the music. And I'm sure you've seen that development happen. It's really amazing when it clicks. Hopefully you've had that experience yourself too. It's the kind of art, whether it's visual or musical, that brings people to tears, that gives people chills, those really powerful moments. That's because it's that integration of the internal and the external. So a leader advocate has a similar journey. First, we observe, we copy other people. We do what we see others doing that seems to work. I think that's really natural and normal. You can see that like developmentally in kids too, right? Like my kids do a lot of the same things that I do. Like they just parrot my behaviors, my sayings, my mannerisms, that sort of thing. So we do that, observing and copying others. And then the second stage, what happens is we start to reject that a little bit. We say, that's not exactly me. And then we turn inward and we start to talk about what's important to us individually. So that's kind of that turning inward experience. And then in the third phase, that's again where we integrate. We recognize and listen to others and find a way to integrate both what I value with what others value. And doing that in such a way, I mean, that's really where the magic of advocacy happens, because that's the point where people can actually see that they're heard, or feel that they're heard, and you're true to your values. And they're able to see not only that it's something important to you, but now it's important to them too. And so you've kind of come to this, it's like magic, right? It's this magic point where like everybody suddenly gets it. And that's where you can kind of push through and make these big changes. So just one final word about embodying your values. And even though like none of this stuff that I've talked about is easy by any stretch of the word, it takes work. But I think maybe this part that I'm going to say next is most challenging, because it's when our values are challenged. It's a really uncomfortable feeling. It again requires humility. We have to take time to dig deep and sit with that discomfort. Explore ourselves more deeply, asking ourselves if that's what we really and truly believe. And maybe we don't believe that anymore. Maybe it's just changed in the hierarchy of importance. The key to authenticity is not that our values never change. The key is that when they do, we have examined our experience and intentionally made the choice to shift and be able to articulate what contributed to that change. And then we got to live like we believe it. And every day, practice who we are. Every day, practice who we are. Okay, so the third tool I want to share is one that I think at first glance might seem like something totally unrelated to what I've already been talking about, because a lot of it was kind of touchy-feely. I'll be real honest. I like touchy-feely, so sorry. But this next one is a little bit different, but I think you'll see really quickly how intertwined this can be with what I've already discussed. And the third tool is thinking like a designer. So I'm going to share again. And what I want to talk about is design thinking. Design thinking is a set of strategies to find solutions to wicked problems. Those problems that don't have real clear definition. And honestly, that's like most of our human experience, I think. Nothing is really all that cut and dry. So your ability as an advocate and a leader can be enhanced if you look at a situation from multiple perspectives, especially the perspective of people who are utilizing your services or your product or whatever it is that you're developing or providing. And design thinking has 5 stages. The first is empathize. See how it connects? Right there, right at the beginning. Empathize is the first stage. And to empathize, you have to listen to whomever you're designing for. So this is happening even before you define the problem. And I think this is where a lot of us get it wrong, because we will identify a problem and then we come up with a bunch of solutions, possible solutions for it. We even do this as clinicians a lot of the time. No shame to anybody, because that's kind of how we're taught to do it. We all do it because sometimes the time we have to establish a treatment plan, or maybe we have limited access to information about a client. But we'll like hear a diagnosis and accept that that's all the information we need and develop an intervention based on that diagnosis without knowing anything else about the person. But think about how much better the process goes when you have the opportunity to do a comprehensive assessment on your client and then synthesize that down into the needs and goal areas and then develop your interventions based on that. So in the empathize stage of designing, we observe, we engage with the stakeholders, whoever they are, and we immerse ourselves as best we can in their experiences, try to see through their eyes. And there we find that what we might have assumed was the biggest problem or need is really secondary to something else. A lot of times those needs are connected with 4 universal needs that we all have: belonging, or needing to feel connected or like we're wanted, accepted, loved. The second one is mastery, feeling competent, that we have the resources we need to succeed. The third universal need is independence, our need to feel like we are in control of our own lives. And the fourth is generosity or worthiness, feeling like we have something of value to give to other people. So we all have those needs all the time. And none of those are particularly observable needs kind of at first pass. We really have to tune in to what others are saying and what they're doing in order to recognize when those needs are unmet. So then we move into defining. At that second stage, we analyze the data, we generate insights, we synthesize the problem, we kind of dig down into all that information that we got from the empathize phase. And a tool we can use here is called the 5 whys. And I love this. We just keep asking why until we get to what the root is. Because usually what the first answer is when we ask why something is the way it is, that's not actually why it is the way it is. If we keep asking why, we will get to what's really going on. And that might uncover some of those unmet needs that I talked about too. Kids are really good at doing that, by the way. Well, you want to practice in the 5 whys, just spend some time with a 3-year-old and you'll be really good at answering it. So we just keep asking why till we get to the root, and then we look at now from our own perspective based on the data. This is where we kind of integrate that outer and inner experience. So we want to be cautious, though, in this defining stage that we are defining a human-centered problem rather than being problem-centered. And I think that tendency, what can sometimes happen even with that 5 whys exercise, is that we try to blame a group or a person for something being the way it is. And if that's the reason, that's probably not actually the reason. Like, you got to keep asking why, because their behavior is a reflection of something else that's going on in the system, whatever that system is. So we want this definition of the problem, quote unquote problem, to be process oriented.